It's always lovely to come along and to be part of this great occasion, and just to see the experience in the room, the number of years that so many of you have given, and those who are a little younger, in the sense the kind of 12 months and up to 5 years, the kind of time you've got in front of you and the difference you can make in people's lives. Can I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and any elders that are here and those who have passed. And I think there's probably many others to pay respects to as well, from different nationalities, from different countries, from different backgrounds, that are here today that bring us to this wonderful event. It's a bit surprising when I think back for the 5 years that I've been involved with Good Shepherd Microfinance and with numbers of you, in particularly around NILS. It's been an amazing opportunity for me, and I think a real chance to think about what's possible in our communities. And I wanted to do a couple of things in this kind of 20 minutes that I have. Effie talked about the book that I've written, and this is the book. And I'm not talking about it on the basis that you have to buy it. I don't really mind, actually, whether you buy it or not. I'm sure the publisher won't like me for that. But it was really an opportunity to work with my good friend Amanda Sinclair and to put together some thoughts that we'd had for quite a while about leadership, and particularly, I guess, about women's leadership. And so the book brings a lot of that together and puts our thoughts about what leadership is really all about. And I wanted to read just a bit to start with, because I think it kind of makes the point, and then I'll work through as we go. If leadership is about initiating and mobilising change, we have much to learn from women. Throughout history and across societies and cultures, women have developed ways of challenging the status quo, of voicing their interests, and of influencing families, workplaces, communities, and nations to become more humane and equitable and inclusive. Because of the intractability of obstacles, women have had to find ingenious ways to influence and reliable means to sustain themselves and others when we encounter setbacks. Women have had to maintain energy and spirit not just over lifetimes, but across generations. We believe leadership by women has not been adequately recognised, and this book sets out to learn how and to what ends women lead. Both of us, Amanda and Christine, have grown frustrated at the narrow approaches that miss the rich diversity of women's leadership. And then we go on to talk about that leadership and about the way that women have led. And I guess for much of my life, I've spent a lot of time both in a leadership position but also studying it. And I think we've kind of missed the boat about what real leadership is. The kind of myths that we've often been sold, the idea that leadership is this person who'll ride in on a horse and they'll just solve the problems and they'll give us all the answers, is a myth. They don't exist. And in many cases, when people kind of put themselves up to be leaders and they don't meet that kind of characteristic, we often are disappointed in them. We shouldn't be disappointed, because that is not what leadership's about. And the idea that some people are born to be leaders, well, just tough luck for the rest of us who weren't. And so there's a kind of a way that people have written about it, and the leadership models of, you'll just do as I tell you to do. That kind of a model never really did work, and the military's moved away from it, policing's moved away from it, the bureaucracies have moved away from it, that were the really strong advocates of that kind of leadership. And so I suppose in this book we try to say different things about leadership. We say that women are leaders, have been leaders, and they've had to lead because it was the only way to make a difference, to change, to bring about the environments around them. And we talk about Aboriginal women, we talk about women in the health sector, in not-for-profits, who've all had to lead in quite kind of ingenious ways. And they've had to do that because it was never about recognising them as leaders. And one of the things I talk about in the book is about my mother. And Mum's departed about 15 months ago, but the first person I ever really saw as a leader and kind of watched her. And this is a woman who came from a very poor background, left school when she was 13. She was given up by her parents when she was 6 and given away to another couple who then abused her and various other things happened to her. And she left home when she was 14 and then made her way in the world and eventually met Dad and then us. And at the point when I was kind of talking about her, she used to work full-time, she looked after 2 kids. She mostly brought us up because Dad was away working all of the time. She was the church secretary. She was a brownout, and that was just in part-time. But that's what women do. And I think the point, I suppose, I wrote about her and wanted to say is that she did an amazing job as a leader in those church organisations with the Brownies. She ran the Brownies for 25 years. Hundreds of young girls went through Brownies with her and learned lots of skills, and the same with the church. And so I think it's about time we recognised that leadership isn't just defined and confined to a really small group of people. And for many of you here, you are leaders. And the point I want to make about that is it comes with obligations. And it comes with you thinking about your own responsibilities as a leader. And I want to kind of come back to that piece in a minute. And I think the issue about how we lead is a really important part. And yes, I've had a lot of experience. I suppose from the first time I kind of took on a leadership role back in the New South Wales Police, back in a long time ago, in about 1975, I guess, when I was asked by a friend, and she said to me, "Christine, I want you to become the head of the Women Police branch of the Police Association." And I said to her, "Well, why would you want me to take that job on?" She said, "Well, actually, because nobody else wants it." And I said, but why me? And she said, "You know, Christine, you've got nothing to lose. They can't demote you. You're already a constable. So there's no kind of going backwards here." And she said, "I reckon you're the one that might actually be able to take this role on." So at 21, I got elected as the head of the Women Police branch of the Police Association. But of course the times were changing. And the times around us in the 70s was a really interesting time, at a time of difference. And so I suppose what happened with me taking on that responsibility, I looked around and went, I'm not a leader, I'm only a constable, what do I know? But one of the things I learned along the way is I went and talked to the other women. There weren't that many of them. It was pretty easy to have conversations with the other couple of hundred. And I talked to them about what they wanted. They wanted maternity leave, they wanted better careers, they wanted a whole series of things that you can imagine. And I thought to myself, you know, Christine, get out there and have a go. And what happened along the way was the world outside changed and so did policing. But I suppose that sense of kind of getting the experience of stepping up and learning from that period for me, and I learned a lot about that. I learned that I should have let some go through to the keeper, that you can't fight everything, that I learned that yelling and screaming at people and kind of demanding your rights and what you want to get done is often not the way to do it. I learned that in partnership with a whole lot of people that I could actually make a difference and inside and outside of policing, and we did. I also learned that it was okay to show your emotions. And I remember at one point I ended up in the circumstance and found myself upset in a particular incident I was dealing with, and all around me were these really tough guys, you know, and someone said to me, Christine, it's okay. It's okay to show that you care, and it's okay to get upset. And I think that sense for me, early days, was it's okay to kind of feel something in your heart. And I notice, you know, obviously the conference is small loans, big heart. And I think all of you have seen the kind of people who get our loans, the kind of people who deserve our loans, and the kind of people whose lives are enormously changed just by a conversation, by a belief in them, by a loan that makes an enormous difference to many people. And many of you have seen and heard many more stories about our Neil's recipients than I have, but I certainly remember some of them and just sitting listening to their wonderful stories about from absolutely nothing to being able to progress and to make enormous differences in their lives because of that conversation and that loan and that support they got from people like you all across this country. And so you can, I think, make a difference and you can kind of stand up for things. And I think leading with your heart and your head, that kind of two parts of it, is a really important part for us not to forget. to be respectful of people, to be thoughtful about what people are trying to do, to not look down on anybody. I often used to say to the police, we don't get a right to look down on anybody. We're not any better than anybody else. And I used to stand there with all my braid and all the hat and all the gear and the medals, but it didn't make me any difference to anybody else. And I think that's a really important part for us to recognise, that we aren't any better than anybody else. Circumstances for us may be different, but the fact that we should treat people decently and equally was an important part, a lesson I learned a long time ago. I was trying to think of some examples where, sort of along my experience, other examples that I thought, where you might kind of stand out a bit and make some decisions, because I think there's a second piece of this, and that's about some courage. So I remember in New South Wales Police, when we decided we wanted to make a change in the issues around women, I had to go and front the most complicated, difficult people in the organisation, and that were the 3 women that I reported to. I used to call it that they lived in the dragon's cave. I wasn't very nice, really, in those days. But I went to see them and tell them that I thought what we should do was work in operational policing. And I remember they kind of looked at me and said, listen, girlie, don't be ridiculous. There's no way women can work in operational policing. I said, well, I think we can, and if we can actually change it for you. We can open up your career opportunities, we can change it for other women, we can bring more women in. It would change the way we operate. And they weren't very happy, and eventually a decision was made by the Commissioner that we should be able to work in operational policing. And I remember they called me back to their office afterwards and said, you defied us. I said, no, I didn't. I said, we put an application forward and we want to give it a try. And they said, well, you've made a major error. It's going to be a disaster. Never going to work. I said, well, but I think it might. They said, no. You're going to come back here, girlie, in 3 months' time and you'll be in tears. I said, okay, I don't know about that. And they said, well, we know, we've been around. Women can't do that job. And I remember walking out of the door and because they said, well, we've chosen where you're going to go. And I said, okay, where are we going to go? And they said, we're sending you to Darlinghurst Police Station. And those of New South Wales in the 70s will know. And so I kind of, isn't quite what I had in mind. I thought we might go to somewhere where you could shop, So we ended up, that was the idea. And I remember walking out the door, out to the park outside, and I was in tears. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe we've got this really entirely wrong. Maybe they're right. And I remember walking outside and I ran into an old detective sergeant. She was this grumpy old detective sergeant, and she said to me, what's the matter with you, Christine? And I was in tears, and I said, look, I'm just a bit upset. I've been upstairs and we're going to go to operational policing, but the senior women think that it'll be a disaster. And she turned around and kind of, shook me and said, listen, Christine, if the blokes can do it, so can you. And she said, you're no dumber than they are. I said, thanks for that. And so it went. But that sense sometimes that you've got to step up. You see, leadership's okay, but you actually have to stand up for your people on occasions. You have to stand up for the idea. You've got to stand up for the purpose. And I think that's an important part. And I remember once in Victoria Police, one of our inspectors died. And he died at the time on a mountain in Tibet, climbing, practising climbing. He was wanting to climb Everest, and he was climbing another mountain. And he was with 2 or 3 other police officers who were going to raise money for a major charity. And he was maybe his mid-40s, I think, very fit, and was up quite at the top of this mountain that he was practising on. And we got a message back that he'd died. And the whole organisation in Victoria Police just knew this bloke for various reasons. He'd been a trainer and educator and ran the Special Operations Group. And they said, he's died on the mountain. I said, well, what happens next? They said, well, you leave bodies on the mountain. So that day, his mother and his wife called up and said, could they come and visit me? So I I said, I actually should be visiting you. He's dead, and I'm really sad about that. They said, no, we want to talk to you. And I said, okay. So they came into the office and they said, Christine, we want you to bring his body home. I said, right. I don't think they bring bodies home from the mountains in Tibet. And they said, we want you to bring him home. I went, okay, we'll give it a try. And so I called in lots of people. We called in Foreign Affairs. We talked to a lot of people to figure out how, in fact, we did it. And in the end, to cut the story short, we managed to find some people who, Alexander Downer, I think at the time, was the foreign minister. He called up the Chinese and asked, was it possible? And they said yes, but the body had to go through back through Beijing, and we said, we're not doing that. We need to bring him down to Kathmandu. And so I sent 2 people on a plane, and they went, and to try and negotiate for us to figure out how to bring his body down. We eventually paid a pilot to take a helicopter up to the top limit of the helicopter, of the height that the helicopters can fly, to bring his body back and the two other colleagues that were with him. And they lost the body on the way back, as in coming down the mountain. Eventually they were able to get the body back, and they got the body on the helicopter and the 2 police officers as well. And they came down to Kathmandu, and we were thinking, okay, we've gone that next phase. And the next phase was the government said they wanted $40,000 to do an autopsy on his body, which was just basically a bribe. So we said we'd pay. And they, that's what happened, we paid. They did the autopsy, sort of, but they released his body and we brought his body home. And we had a funeral service, and there were 1,000 people there, and many, many more who couldn't come. And people often say to me, so why did you do it? I said, I guess because we could. I said, but more importantly, it was because we should, and we had to. And it wasn't just because he was an inspector that people knew. We did other things for people who weren't inspectors. They were constables, and they were in trouble as well. But I guess you have to sometimes just do things. I suppose I want to encourage you to think about your own roles, to think about what stops you. What stops you doing the kind of things you know you could do, the kind of change. And one of the things that I've watched with Good Shepherd Microfinance is people have said things to us that you can't possibly do this, and the board and the team and lots of other people and many of you, and you kind of push this thing that people said it's not going to move, it's not going to change, and you just push a bit further and you push a bit further and you go, wow, gee, well, we managed that one. And I suppose that's what I've learned. I've watched people in bushfires, seriously damaged and harmed, and 173 people died in our bushfires. But I've watched people in those communities stand up and want to help each other. And they've done it because they cared and they loved the people who had gone, but they wanted to think about their communities and how they might be better in the future. And I guess that's really what I want to talk about and want to say to you, is to think about how great this organisation, all of these organisations could be if we just pushed a bit harder, if we just thought a bit more, if we just kind of stood up and said to those people, who are stopping us doing what we could do, get out of the way, or come join us, more importantly. I think power is a part of it, and in the front of the book, on a piece of the book on this, we wrote, Julia Gillard actually gets a quote from her, and the chapter's called Power, How to Find It, Use It and Own It. Women need power to change things. Participation is the start, but power is the end. Women seeking to exercise leadership have often felt ambivalent about power, and for good reason. Power as a concept can bring with it implications of coercion, of lording it over others. Notice the gender reference in it. For millennia and still in contemporary societies, women have been victims of power in families, religious organisations, educational and workplace context. Yet there are many reasons why anybody interested in effective leadership should also be interested in supplementing their authority and making decisions through other sources of power. And so the point, I guess, we sometimes find ourselves powerless, and sometimes we try to think about how we might get past that. But power is an important piece. Having the power within, power in your belief, a power of purpose, a power of support, of partners, all of the ways that you can think about how to move forward. Just before I came today, I was at home and I have to do a thing afterwards, but I was doing some work on it, and I looked at a video. It was really interesting, and there's just a couple of things I want to say. And that was about a sense of courage. And one of the comments this person made is, do something with no guarantees. You don't know if it's going to work out or you're not. Have a sense of gratitude for what you've got. Believe in yourself. I've watched a lot of people who don't. I only come from the western suburbs of Sydney. I only come from Foster. I only come from these places and I couldn't possibly do the things you're asking. You see, I don't come from many different places as the rest of you. I don't. Didn't come from money, and you heard about Mum. We didn't come from a family that had a lot either. But the fact is you can actually put yourself forward. And then you'll say, but Christine, what if people are critical of me? Well, I think that there isn't anybody in the room that has had more criticism than me. Now, if you want to argue afterwards, that's fine. I'm happy about that. But you see, you can survive it. Yeah, people are going to say things like, why is she doing that? Why is he doing that? And you just turn around and explain. But we get awfully afraid about criticism. What will people say about us? What will they think about us? Well, if you had people like Alan Jones, the Australian, Andrew Bolt, Janet Elbrickson recently, a whole range of other people, do you think I care? Couldn't care less. They don't know anything. If it was some of you who were criticising me about Nils, then I'd care, because you know something about it. And so the point about criticism is you've got to kind of think about how to get over it. And a story I may have told you before, but I was criticised during the Bushfire Royal Commission a lot, and had to make a decision about whether I stayed in the Recovery Authority or not. And I remember a particular occasion, and I'll finish with this, is I was had 3 or 4 days in the front page of the newspapers about what a terrible person I was and terrible things that I've done, and therefore I should stand down from the head of the authority. And I was supposed to go to a function which was at Federation Square that one night, and it was a farewell and a thank you from Kinglake community to the community of Melbourne. And there were a lot of musicians. Kinglake is a very talented community, and they were playing on the stage. And I was supposed to go and close the concert that night. And so I sent a message with one of my people saying I wouldn't be coming, that they needed to, it was probably best if I didn't go. So I got a telephone call from a woman, and she said to me, Christine, you're not coming down tonight? And I said, no, look, I think there's only so much more kind of media I need. I said, by the way, are there any media there? She said, oh yes, there's hundreds of them. I said, they're not there to hear you sing, are they? She said, no. And I said, look, it's probably better if I don't come. You know, it's just easier. She said, no, you have to come. And she said, we want you to come, we want you to close the night, and we want to say some things as well. So I went, okay. So down I went, and she got me up on the stage, and there were media everywhere, and this wonderful woman said, look, we all made mistakes during those bushfires, but we've worked with Christine for the last couple of years, and we want her to stay with us because she understands us and she respects us and she wants to work with us and we want to work with her. So would you all please back off? And I remember listening to this woman speak about it, and here I was thinking about, you know, I just wish I could have pulled a sheet over my head and stayed there forever and kind of, you know, just disappeared. And she was saying, no, we want you to stay and we want you to work with us, and you know, all of that whatever happens about the Royal Commission will happen. And I remember thinking to myself, this is a woman who had just lost her 2 kids in the fires, and a brother was burned and a mother was injured, but she was standing up for me. So I suppose you can get criticised, but one of the things I thought to myself is, get over yourself, Christine. Get over yourself, get on with the job and do it. And so I guess what I'd like to say to you is to have the courage to lead, all of you. You don't have to be anybody to be able to lead. You have to be somebody who wants to lead. And that's the important part. Thanks.